Okay, welcome to Harry Potter Reading Club.
Uh,
Before we start, would anyone like to kind of give a recap or tell us about what happened last time? If you guys do remember.
um,
If not, that's okay.
Last time,
Mhm.
um, the Quidditch match started
Okay,
and it ended up pretty well.
okay,
Mm, Gryffindor won. Um,
okay, perfect. Okay, so I guess I'll start off with the reading and at some point, if you guys want to join, I'll let you guys join. Okay. So I believe the last thing we ended on was here. Very safe as they're both dentists. Dentists, says Hermione. Once the holidays had started, Ron and Harry were having too good a time to think much about Flamel. Flamel? Flamel? They had the dormitory to themselves, and the common room was far emptier than usual, so they were able to get the good armchairs by the fire. They sat by the hour, eating anything they could spare on a toasting fork, bread, English muffins, marshmallows, and plotting ways of getting Malfoy expelled, which were fun to talk about, even if they wouldn't work. Ron also started teaching Harry wizard chess. This was exactly like Muggle chess, except that the figures were alive, which made it a lot like directing troops in battle. Ron's set was very old and battered. Like everything else he owned, it had once belonged to someone else in his family, in this case, his grandfather. However, old chessmen weren't a drop weren't a drawback at all. Ron knew them so well, he never had trouble getting them to do what he wanted. Harry played with chessmen Seamus Finnegan, I'm butchering that, had lent him, and they didn't trust him at all. He wasn't a very good player yet, and they kept shouting different bits of advice at him, which was confusing. Don't send me there. Can't you see his knight? Send him. We can afford to lose him. On Christmas Eve, Harry went to bed looking forward to the next day for the food and the fun, but not expecting any presents at all. When he woke up early in the morning, however, the first thing he saw was a small pile of packages at the foot of his bed. Merry Christmas, said Ron sleepily as Harry scrambled out of the bed and pulled on his bathrobe. You too, said Harry. Will you look at this? I've got some presents. What did you expect, turnips? Said Ron, turning his own pile, which was a lot bigger than Harry's. Harry picked up the top parcel. It was wrapped in thick brown paper and scrawled across it was to Harry from Hagrid. Inside was a roughly cut wooden flute. Hagrid had obviously whittled it himself. Harry blew it. It sounded a bit like an owl. A second, very small parcel contained a note. We received your message and enclosed your Christmas present from Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia. Taped to the note was a 50 pence piece. That's friendly, said Harry. Ron was fascinated by the 50 pence. Weird, he said. Matt, a shape. This is money? You can keep it, said Harry, laughing at how pleased Ron was. Hagrid and my aunt and my uncle. So who sent these? I think I know who that one's from, said Ron, turning a bit pink and pointing to a very lumpy parcel. My mom. I told her you didn't expect any presents, and oh no, he groaned. She's made you a Weasley sweater. Harry had torn open the parcel to find a thick, hand-knitted sweater in emerald green and a large box of homemade fudge. Every year she makes us a sweater, said Ron, unwrapping his own. Mine's always maroon. That's really nice of her, said Harry, trying the fudge, which was very tasty. His next his next present also contained candy, a large box of chocolate frogs from Hermione. This only left one parcel. Harry picked it up and felt it. It was very light. He unwrapped it. Something fluid and silvery gray went slithering to the floor where it lay in the gleaming folds. Ron gasped. I've heard of those, he said in a hushed voice, dropping the box of every flavor beans he'd gotten from Hermione. That's what I think it is. They're really rare and really valuable. What is it? Harry picked the shining silvery cloth off the floor. It was strange to the touch, like water woven into material. That's an invisibility cloak, said Ron, a look of awe on his face. I'm sure it is. Try it on. Harry threw the cloak around his shoulders, and Ron gave a yell. It is! Look down! Harry looked down at his feet. They were gone. He dashed to the mirror. Sure enough, his reflection looked back at him, just his head suspended in midair, his body completely invisible. He pulled the cloak over his head and his reflection vanished completely. There's a note, said Ron suddenly. A note fell out of a note fell out of it. Harry pulled off the cloak and seized the letter. Written in narrow, loopy writing he had never seen before were the following words. Your father left this in my possession before he died. It is time it was returned to you. Use it well. A very Merry Christmas to you. There was no signature. Harry stared at the note. Ron was admiring the cloak. I'd give anything for one of these, he said. Anything. What's the matter? Nothing, said Harry. He felt very strange. Who had sent the cloak? Had it really once belonged to his father? Before he could say or think anything else, the dormitory door was flung open and Fred and George Weasley bounded in. Harry stuffed the cloak quickly out of sight. He didn't feel like sharing it with anyone else yet. Merry Christmas. Hey, look, Harry's got a Weasley sweater too. Fred and George were wearing blue sweaters, one with a large yellow F on it, the other a G. Harry's is better than ours, though, said Fred, holding up Harry's sweater. She obviously makes more of an effort if you're not family. Why aren't you wearing yours, Ron? George demanded. Come on, get it on. They're lovely and warm. I hate maroon, Ron moaned half-heartedly as he pulled it over his head. You haven't got a letter on yours, George observed. I suppose she thinks you don't forget your name. But we're not stupid. We know we're called Gred and Forge. What's all Alf is noise. Percy Weasley stuck his head through the door, looking disapproving. He had clearly gone halfway through unwrapping his presents as he, too, carried a lumpy sweater over his arm, which Fred seized. He is for perfect. Get it on, Percy. Come on. We're all wearing ours. Even Harry got one. I don't want, said Percy thickly, as the twins forced the sweater over his head, knocking his glasses askew. And you're not sitting with the prefects today either, said George. Christmas is a time for family. They frog marched Percy from the room, his arms pinned to his side by his sweater. Harry had never in all his life had such a Christmas dinner. 100 fat roast turkeys, fountains of roast and boiled potatoes, platters of chipolatas, tureens of buttered peas, silver boats of thick, rich gravy and cranberry sauce, and stacks of wizard crackers every few feet along the table. These fantastic party favors were nothing like the feeble muggle ones the Dursleys usually bought, with their little plastic toys and their flimsy paper hats inside. Harry pulled a wizard cracker with Fred, and it didn't just bang. It went off with a blast like a cannon and engulfed them all in a cloud of blue smoke, while the inside exploded a rear admiral's hat and several live white mice up at the high table. Dumbledore had swapped his pointed wizard's hat for a flowered bonnet and was chuckling merrily at a joke Professor Flitwick had just read him. Flaming Christmas puddings followed the turkey. Percy nearly broke his teeth on a silver sickle embedded in his slice. Harry watched Hagrid getting redder and redder in the face as he called for more wine, finally kissing Professor McGonagall on the cheek, who, to Harry's amazement, giggled and blushed, her top hat lopsided. When Harry finally left the table, he was laden down with a stack of things out of the crackers, including a pack of non-explodable luminous balloons, a grow-your-own warts kit, and his own new wizard chest set. The white mice had disappeared, and Harry had a nasty feeling they were going to end up as Miss Norris's Christmas dinner. Harry and the Weasleys spent a happy afternoon having a furious snowball fight on the grounds. Then, cold, wet, and gasping for breath, they returned to the fire in the Gryffindor common room, where Harry broke in his new chess set by losing spectacularly to Ron. He suspected he wouldn't have lost so badly if Percy hadn't tried to help him so much. After a meal of turkey sandwiches, crumpets, trifle, and Christmas cake, everyone felt too full and sleepy to do much before bed except sit and watch Percy chase Fred and George all over Gryffindor Tower because they'd stolen his perfect badge, or prefect badge. It had been Harry's best Christmas day ever, yet something had been nagging at the back of his mind all day. Not until he climbed into his bed was he free to think about it. The invisibility cloak and whoever had sent it. Ron, full of turkey and cake, and with nothing mysterious to bother him, fell asleep almost as soon as he'd drawn the curtains of his four-poster. Harry leaned over the side of his own bed and pulled the cloak out from under it. His father's. This had been his father's. He let the material flow over his hands, smoother than silk, light as air. Use it well, the note had said. He had tried it now. He had to try it now. He slipped out of bed and wrapped the cloak around himself. Looking down at his legs, he saw only moonlight and shadows. It was a very funny feeling. Use it well. Suddenly, Harry felt wide awake. The whole of Hogwarts was open to him in this cloak. Excitement flooded through him as he stood there in the dark and silence. He could go anywhere in this, anywhere, and Filch would never know. Ron grunted in his sleep. Should Harry wake him? Something held him back. His father's cloak. He felt that this time, the first time, he wanted to use it alone. He crept out of the dormitory, down the stairs, across the common room, and climbed through the portrait hole. Who's there? Squawked the fat lady. Harry said nothing. He walked quickly down the corridor. Where should he go? He stopped, his heart racing in thought. And then it came to him. The restricted section in the library. He'd be able to read as long as he liked, as long as it took him to find out who Flamel was. He set off, drawing the invisibility cloak tight around him as he walked. The library was pitch black and very eerie. Harry hit a lamp to see his way along the row of books. The lamp looked as if it was floating along in midair, and even though Harry could feel his arm supporting it, the sight gave him the creeps. The restricted section was right at the back of the library. Stepping carefully over the rope that separated these books from the rest of the library, he held up his lamp to read the titles. They didn't tell him much. They're peeling. Faded gold letters spelled words in languages Harry couldn't understand. Some had no title at all. One book had a dark skin on it that looked horribly like blood. The hairs on the back of Harry's neck prickled. Maybe he was imagining it, maybe not, but he thought a faint whispering was coming from the books, as though they knew someone was there and who shouldn't be. He had to start somewhere. Setting the lamp down carefully on the floor, he looked along the bottom shelf for an interesting-looking book. A large black and silver volume caught his eye. He pulled it out with difficulty, because it was very heavy, and balancing it on his knee, let it fall open. A piercing, blood-curdling shriek split the silence. The book was screaming. Harry snapped it shut, but the shriek went on, one high, unbroken, ear-splitting note. He stumbled backward and knocked over his lamp, which went out at once. Panicking, he heard footsteps coming down the corridor outside. The stuffing and shrieking book back on the shelf, he ran for it. He passed Filch in the doorway. Filch's pale, wide eyes looked straight through him, and Harry slipped under Filch's outstretched arm and shrieked off up the corridor, the book's shrieks still ringing in his ears. He came to a sudden halt in front of a tall suit of armor. He had been so busy getting away from the library, he hadn't paid attention to where he was going. Perhaps because it was dark, he didn't recognize where he was at all. There was a suit of armor near the kitchens, he knew, but he must be 5 floors above there. You asked me to come directly to you, Professor. If anyone was wandering around at night, and somebody's been in the library restricted section. Harry felt the blood drain out of his face. Wherever he was, Filch must know a shortcut, because his soft, greasy voice was getting nearer. And to his horror, it was Snape who replied, the restricted section? Well, they can't be far. We'll catch him. Harry stood rooted to the spot as Filch and Snape came around the corner ahead. They couldn't see him, of course, but it was a narrow corridor, and if they came much nearer, they'd knock right into him. The cloak didn't stop him from being solid. He backed away as quietly as he could. A door stood ajar to his left. It was his only hope. He squeezed through it, holding his breath, trying not to move it, and to his relief, he managed to get inside the room without their noticing anything. They walked straight past, and Harry leaned against the wall, breathing deeply, listening to their footsteps dying away. They had been close, very close. It was a few seconds before he noticed anything about the room he had hidden in. Okay. Would anyone like to read from this before? Okay, James. Start from here. It looked like an unused classroom.
It looked like an unused classroom. The dark shapes of desks and the chairs were piled against the walls. And there was an upturned waste paper basket, but propped against the wall facing him was something that didn't look as if it belonged there. Something that looked as if someone had just put it there to keep it out of the way. It was a magnificent mirror. As high as the ceiling, with an ornate gold frame. Standing on two clawed feet, there was inscription carved around the top. Erased oid oid on Oshi. His panic fading now that there was no sound of Filch and Snape. Harry moved nearer to the mirror, wanting to look at himself, but see no reflection again. He stepped in front of it. He had to clap his hands to his mouth to stop himself from screaming. He whirled around. Her heart was pounding far more furiously than when the book had screamed. For he had seen not only himself in the mirror, but a whole crowd of people standing right behind him. But the room was empty. Breathing very fast, he turned slowly back to the mirror. There was he, reflected in it, while white and scared looking. And there, reflected behind him, were at least 10 others. Harry looked over his shoulder, but still no one was there. Or were they all invisible too? Was he, in fact, in a room full of invisible people at this mirror's trick? Was that it that reflected them, invisible or not? He looked in the mirror again. A woman standing right behind his reflection was smiling at him and waving. He reached out a hand and felt the air behind him. If she was really there, he'd touch her. Their reflections were so close together, but he felt only air. She and the others existed only in the mirror. She was a very pretty woman. She had dark red hair and her eyes. Her eyes are just like mine, Harry thought, edging a little closer to the glass. Bright green, exactly the same shape. But then he noticed that she was crying, smiling, but crying at the same time. A tall, thin, black-haired man standing next to her put his arm around her. He wore glasses and his hair was very untidy. It stuck up at the back, just as Harry's did. Harry was so close to the mirror now that his nose was nearly touching that of his reflection. "Mom," he whispered. "Dad?" They just looked at him, smiled, and slowly Harry looked into the faces of the other people in the mirror and saw other pairs of green eyes like his. Other noses like his. Even a little old man who looked as though he had Harry's knobbly knees. Harry was looking at his family for the first time in his life. The Potters smiled and waved at Harry, and he stared hungrily back at them. His hands pressed flat against the glass as though he was hoping to fall right through it and reach them. He had a powerful kind of ache inside him. Half joy, half terrible sadness. How long he stood there, he didn't know. The reflections did not fade, and he looked and looked until a distant noise brought him back to his senses. He couldn't stay here. He had to find his way back to bed. He tore his eyes away from his mother's face. He whispered, "I'll come back." and hurried from the room.
Okay. Nice job. I'm gonna stop you right here. And I think I'll continue reading, but thank you so much. And yeah, I guess I can give a quick recap. But basically, it was Christmas, and Harry got a bunch of gifts, one of them being an invisibility cloak. And so after a full day of eating and having fun, he went to the library, specifically the restricted section, and he got caught doing so because there was a book that was screaming at him. So he ran to another room with a mirror inside, and apparently what he saw was his whole family there. Okay. Okay. You could have woken me up, said Ron crossly. You can come tonight. I'm going back. I want to show you the mirror. I'd like to see your mom and dad, Ron said eagerly. I want to see all your family, all the Weasleys. You're able to show me your other brothers and everyone. You can see them any old time, said Ron. Just come around my house this summer. Anyway, maybe it only shows dead people. Shame about not finding Flamel, though. Have some bacon or something. Why aren't you eating anything? Harry couldn't eat. He had seen his parents and would be seeing them again tonight. He had almost forgotten about Flamel. It didn't seem very important anymore. Who cared about the three-headed dog was guarding? Or who cared what the three-headed dog was guarding? What did it matter if Snape stole it? Really? Are you all right, said Ron? You look old, or you look odd. What Harry feared most was that he might not be able to find the mirror room again. With Ron covered in the cloak too, they had to walk much more slowly the next night. They tried retracing Harry's route from the library, wandering around the dark passageways for nearly an hour. I'm freezing, said Ron. Let's forget about it. Or let's forget it and go back. No, Harry hissed. I know it's here somewhere. They passed the ghost of a tall witch gliding in the opposite direction, but saw no one else. Just as Ron started moaning that his feet were dead with cold, Harry spotted the suit of armor. It's here, just here, yes. They pushed the door open. Harry dropped the cloak from around his shoulders and ran to the mirror. They were there. His mother and father beamed at the sight of him. See, Harry whispered. I can't see anything. Look at them all. There are loads of them. I can only see you. Look at it properly, go on. Stand where I am. Harry stepped aside, but with Ron in front of the mirror, he couldn't see his family anymore. Just Ron in his paisley pajamas. Ron, though, was staring transfixed at his image. Look at me, he said. Can you see all your family standing around you? No, I'm alone. But I'm different. I look older. I'm a head boy. What? I am. I'm wearing the badge like Bill used to. And I'm holding the house cup and the Quidditch cup. I'm Quidditch captain too. Ron tore his eyes away from the splendid sight to look excitedly at Harry. Do you think this mirror shows the future? How can it? All my family are dead. Let me have another look. You had it to yourself all last night. Give me a bit more time. You're only holding the Quidditch cup. What's interesting about that? I want to see my parents. Don't push me. A sudden noise outside the corridor put an end to their discussion. They hadn't realized how loudly they'd been talking. Quick! Ron threw the cloak back over them as the luminous eyes of Miss Norris came round the door. Ron and Harry stood quite still, both thinking the same thing. Did the cloak work on cats? After what seemed an age, she turned and left. This isn't safe. She might have gone for Filch. I bet she heard us. Come on. And Ron pulled Harry out of the room. The snow still hadn't melted the next morning. Want to play chess, Harry? Said Ron. No. Why don't we go down and visit Hagrid? No, you go. I know what you're thinking about, Harry. That mirror. Don't go back tonight. Why not? I don't know. I've got a bad feeling about it. And anyway, you've had too many close shaves already. Filch, Snape, and Miss Norris are wandering around. So what if they can't see you? What if they walk into you? What if you knock something over? You sound like Hermione. I'm serious. Harry, don't go. But Harry only had one thought in his head, which was to get back in front of the mirror. And Ron wasn't going to stop him. The third night, he found his way more quickly than before. He was walking so fast he knew he was making more noise than was wise, but he didn't meet anyone. There was his mother and father smiling at him again, and one of his grandfathers nodding happily. Here he sank down to sit on the floor in front of the mirror. There was nothing to stop him. There was nothing to stop him from staying here all night with his family. Nothing at all, except, so, back again, Harry? Harry felt as though his insides had turned into ice. He looked behind him. Sitting on one of the desks by the wall was none other than Albus Dumbledore. Harry must have walked straight past him, so desperate to get to the mirror he hadn't noticed him. I didn't see you, sir. Strange how nearsighted being invisible can make you, said Dumbledore, and Harry was relieved to see that he was smiling. So, said Dumbledore, slipping off the desk to sit on the floor with Harry, you, like hundreds before you, have discovered the delights of the mirror of Arist, or Erised, or I don't know how to say it. I didn't know it was called that, sir. But I expected you'd realize by now what it does. Well, it shows me my family, and it showed your friend Ron himself as head boy. How did you know? I don't need a cloak to become invisible, said Dumbledore gently. Now, can you think what the mirror of Arised shows us all? Harry shook his head. Let me explain. The happiest man on earth would be able to see or be able to use the mirror of Arised like a normal mirror. That is, he would look into it and see himself exactly as he is. Does that help? Harry thought. Then he said slowly, it shows us what we want, whatever we want. Yes and no, said Dumbledore gently, quietly. It shows us nothing more or less than the deepest, most desperate desire of our hearts. You, who have never known your family, see them standing around you. Ronald Weasley, who has always been overshadowed by his brothers, sees himself standing alone, the best of all of them. However, this mirror will give us neither knowledge or truth. Men have wasted away before it, entranced by what they have seen, or been driven mad, not knowing if what it shows is real or even possible. The mirror will be moved to a new home tomorrow, Harry, and I ask you not to go looking for it again. If you ever do run across it, you will now be prepared. It does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live. Remember that. Now, why don't you put that admirable cloak back on and get off to bed? Harry stood up. Sir, Professor Dumbledore, can I ask you something? Obviously, you've just done so, Dumbledore smiled. You may ask me one more thing, however. What do you see when you look in the mirror? I see myself holding a pair of thick woolen socks. Harry stared. One can never have enough socks, said Dumbledore. Another Christmas has come and gone, and I didn't get a single pair. People will insist on giving me books. It was only when he was back in bed that it struck Harry that Dumbledore might not have been quite truthful. But then, he thought, as he shoved Scabbers off his pillow, it had been quite a personal question. Okay, we are at we finished chapter 12. And I think, I don't think we have time to really start chapter. I guess I can give you guys some questions for open discussions, okay? So for example, do you guys have anything specific that you guys would do if you had the invisible cloak or the invisibility cloak? What would you do with it if you had it? Anyone? You can just unmute and share.
I don't know. Michael, do you want to share?
Yeah. Do you have anything you would want to do with the invisibility cloak? Remember, the invisibility cloak can make you invisible. So you can do a lot of things with invisibility. Okay. If not, I guess. Okay. How about this? What do you guys think Harry felt when he received all of those gifts from Ron and Hermione and all his friends?
Curious, because he doesn't know what the invisibility cloak does yet.
Right.
Then he knows it.
Okay. But what about the other gifts, like the sweater and the frog, the chocolate frogs? Like the ones Ron
He
and
likes
Hermione
them.
sent? Yeah, he likes them, right? Especially he feels really grateful, I would say, because before he had never really had that same experience with his other, I guess, human family. And so having his first Christmas at Hogwarts being so great must have made him feel really happy. Okay. What else? Okay. Do you think Dumbledore actually wanted socks? Like if he looked at the mirror, would he really see himself holding pairs of socks? Because Harry questioned it himself too. He asked, or he said, it was only when he was back in bed that it struck Harry that Dumbledore might not have been quite truthful. Meaning, he's thinking if Dumbledore actually lied about him wanting socks. So, do you guys think he actually wanted socks? Or if not, what do you guys think he might have wanted?
I think so.
I mean, he did say that one can never have enough socks. And he did say that people never gave him socks for Christmas.